Have you encountered the situation where you have just given feedback to your staff and then you go on this guilt-ridden trip, wondering to yourself whether you have been too strict with the staff, whether you have been really mean, whether you were micromanaging? All these doubts come to your mind, and I can assure you, we've all been there. We have done that before. And whether you're a seasoned manager or you're a first-time manager, I want to share with you 3 tips that you can counter-check before you decide a feedback is necessary. So tip number 1 is to check whether a feedback is necessary to your staff. Sometimes when someone comes to you and tell you, hey, your staff have not been performing, have not met certain expectations, and based on that feedback you jump into conclusions and you start to reprimand your staff. The question is, was that really necessary? So when I was bumped up as a first-time manager, I started to be very sensitive on things that I didn't really care much about when I was an individual contributor. For example, the staff coming in to work late or leaving from work early. These kinds of things didn't matter to me when I was an individual contributor. But when I started to fill in different shoes, I realized that I had to be sensitive about stuff like disciplinary issues. I was really tempted to reprimand the person, and I found out that actually this person was having a lot of night meetings, doing a lot of overtime, burning the midnight oil for his team. Because of that, he had to rush through coming in late for work, leaving early so that he can make it in time back home for all these meetings. And I'm so glad I didn't jump into conclusions and give him unnecessary stress. So the thing is, don't be too quick to make judgment. Trust your team that they can handle the business on their own. But if the situation becomes too obvious or is something that you cannot ignore, then by all means, a feedback is necessary. Tip number 2 is to ask yourself, did you set the right expectations to your staff? When I was a junior consultant, I consider myself a hardworking person. I was studying all the manuals, but I just didn't know how to relate what I was studying to apply in my work. And therefore, I was missing a lot of expectations. I didn't hit the mark. I was not selected for any promotion because I wasn't doing that well. And it kind of really made me feel that I was this useless person. And this carried on for the next 2 years. I was put on bench while others were allocated to projects while I was just being sidelined. So this manager saw my situation and came up to me, assessed my situation and decided to give me a chance. She sat me down, coached me, the ABCs of it from the very basics. It was not an easy journey because she was really a strict coach, but I pursued it until I found that I could really relate everything. It all made sense, it all clicked, and I started to appreciate what I was doing, and I started to produce top-notch work. And that was that moment in time. I was really appreciative that someone was there to coach me, to help me to understand, to light up the way for me to move ahead. Coming back to this moment, I don't want to put my team in a situation where I throw them into that whirlwind of roller coaster and expect them to survive on their own. It's very important that we set the right expectations, make sure they understand the milestones, make sure they understand the timeline, make sure they understand what results are expected to be produced, make sure they have all the coaching they need, the mentors they need, so that they are able to produce what you are expecting them to produce. Before you start reprimanding them, ask yourself, have you done your due diligence? Tip number 3 is to create an environment that encourages open dialogue. I remember the time during my one-to-one meetings with my staff, and my staff will update me things about project statuses, and I found that things were going really well. My staff was telling me a lot of good news. They are meeting the milestones, they are meeting the deadlines, the results, everything is good. And I thought I was the best manager in the world. I managed my team so well. Later to find out from other teams that my staff was really struggling in their work. They were deferring activities to the next milestone. And all these things came back to me, and I asked myself, why did this happen in the first place? Why were they not transparent to me? And I realized that I was not creating an environment comfortable enough for them to be transparent about the situation. So the fault actually lies in me. I evaluated the relationship between me and my boss because I felt that I was able to share a lot of things with my boss, problems, and together we work out solutions on how to solve them. And what was the difference between my management and my boss's management? Then I realized that one thing that stuck out like a sore thumb was my manager was really, truly concerned about my well-being. During our lunch together, she would ask things like, when do you plan to do your vacation? And where do you plan to go for your vacation? So it was things like this that broke the ice. I love questions like this the most. Who doesn't? Because it's the most stress relieving topics, talking about your vacations. And I started to share with her where I plan to go, who I plan to bring, what I plan to do, when I plan to have my vacations, and we will discuss it together, and it was so fun. And that kind of conversation broke the ice, broke that tense situation between me and her, and I started to find it easier to communicate with her. I found it easier to communicate work-related stuff with her because I felt comfortable talking to her. And that's the thing that most managers do not realize. They put themselves at the different levels so high that it's so hard for the staff to reach them. So before you start to give feedback to your staff, check these 3 points. Is the feedback really necessary? Have you set the right expectations to your staff? Are they given the right coaching? Have you set the right environment to have an open dialogue? If you have done all these 3 things and the feedback is really necessary, by all means go ahead. So I hope these tips will help you step up in your managerial role. And if you enjoy this video, remember to give a thumbs up on this video and give in your comments on how you use these tips to step up in your role as a manager. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to see you in my next video. Bye bye.